All righty. I always have folks do this so I get it right. Can I get you to give me your first and last name and spell it for me, please?
Richard, last name Shaffer, Shaffer.
Okay. And so do you prefer Rich or Rick? I'm sorry.
Rick.
Rick. Okay, I'm sorry.
No worries. All right.
Okay. So we spoke on the phone, and as I mentioned, we're just really interested in hearing about your take working on this case and how you seem to have developed such a personal connection to it, and clearly to the point where you were carrying around Asha's photo with you for more than a decade.
Yeah. So when we first got called into the case by Sheriff Crawford the day after Asha was missing, I went down there. I was the supervisor of the violent crimes squad at that time, went down there with a handful of agents to see how we could assist. When I got to the house, it was in a relatively rural area in Cleveland County, a working class neighborhood. The homes were, for the most part, well kept. The working class families walked into the house. Nothing struck me as unusual. There wasn't any indication of, that wasn't kept up. The house seemed to be in good order. The family was obviously very distraught. And when we started to get into the story of what happened, I remember Aisha's mom giving me a photo of her, and I obviously had never met her before. I saw the photo and I was just struck by not only how pretty she was, but how innocent she looked. And immediately my mind drifted to the fact that I had a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old little boy at the same time. And as the story started to unfold, I was struggling with trying to be as mindful professionally to find Asha, but also resisting the fear and the angst that they must have been feeling with this young child who left the house unexplained in the middle of the night. Now, keep in mind, this was February the 14th. It was a cold, chilly night, raining. We're in a rural area, so it was very dark. The weather was obviously not good. And for a 9-year-old to voluntarily leave her house and embark upon a journey on foot in a rural, dark area in the middle of the night was just unconscionable. I mean, we couldn't figure out what would cause that to happen. Obviously, you look at a number of different things right in the center of the house and figure, okay, what would cause this little girl to be that upset to leave in the middle of the night? And it's unfortunate that we weren't able to resolve it quickly, but nevertheless, it was clear after weeks of investigation that the parents were not the target of this investigation. They were obviously victims just like Asha. They've lost their little girl. And as a parent, as well as a law enforcement officer, I was just dumbfounded at the reason that she would leave, but I was just crushed over the fact that this little girl was out there. She could have been scared, hurt, somewhere where we couldn't find her, and we felt helpless in that respect. But I remember that night after the first day, I went back home and I told my wife about this particular case, and I just asked her, would we be asking the same questions if one of our two sons decided to walk out of the house in the middle of the night and disappear? You'd be asking yourself, what did you do? What did we do to cause that? And it was just unthinkable. And for the longest time, I made this a priority case in my life. I carried her photo around with me for years. I chased with every lead with the same zeal that we had that night years later. Every lead that we had, I made sure it was pursued. Even after I retired from the FBI, I made a point of going back periodically and meeting the new supervisors that inherited the case and just ask them if they could tell me that they're still keeping the case active. And they were. They never turned it into a cold case. It was always a priority case. And they made sure, not only on the anniversary, but prior to the anniversary, that every piece of information came in, they ran it down. So I was heartened by that part of it.
How long have you been in law enforcement?
38 years.
And where does this case rank for you?
Well, in my time, I started off as a policeman and then went with naval criminal and investigative service for a while. But in the FBI, it's probably the one case that haunts me forever because I was never able to not necessarily solve it because there are cases we couldn't solve, but we never had any understanding of the motive that caused her to leave. So it was very hard to resolve a case when you didn't know what the reason was that caused her to leave in the first place. Was it, a friend or an acquaintance, a teacher, a coach, somebody lure her out of the house? We never found any evidence of that. And that part bothered me more than anything. I felt like so many times that we failed that little girl because we couldn't put a reason why she left. If we could figure out the reason why, it would help us focus on people that either had her, took her, or, ultimately it looks like hurt her.
I think that maybe some folks might be surprised to hear that, you know, someone who's investigating this case takes it so personally. I think in the sense of like, sometimes when you do difficult work and you're trying to navigate through a lot of different traumatic crimes and whatnot, maybe you try to separate from that and try to protect yourself. But it seems like you really, in some ways, allowed yourself to get steeped in this case and take it personally.
Well, I did, and you're right. You always have to try and separate yourself from the case so you don't lose objectivity. But in this particular case, it was hard to explain that when I saw that picture of her, immediately my mind went to, oh my goodness, she's out there somewhere in the dark, in the middle of the night, scared, cold. Um, she obviously left under her own volition for what we could determine. And I just could never get my head wrapped around the fact that she left that house and the warmth of her family. And for every investigative lead we had, the family was supportive. They were faith-based. They loved her. We couldn't tie anything directly to any problem in the house. So what caused her to go? And that part was the most difficult. I mean, I've worked parental kidnapping cases where you understand one of the parents took the child and then it becomes a matter of trying to find that child. It was so hard to find Aisha because we really didn't know where to look because we didn't have any starting point once she left the house. We had some witnesses that told us that, okay, they thought they saw her along the road. We conducted interviews there, but nothing ever surfaced that gave us any credibility to that. So there were so many loose ends and dead ends in the beginning. We couldn't help but be just frustrated, disappointed, and discouraged by it. And what a lot of people lose perspective is to realize that people in law enforcement, whether they're a state or local law enforcement or a federal agent, we're all human beings, we're all parents, we're grandparents, and we understand the hurt that the Degrees were going through and their family. We wanted nothing more than to help them through their pain, get some resolution to this. But to me, is to find that little girl safe was something that was paramount. And I carried that photo for the longest time. I thought after I retired from the FBI and I was working in cases where I was doing background investigations on people that were looking to take jobs in the federal government, I found myself down in that Cleveland County area on occasion and thought, okay, 15, 17, 18 years later, I'd be talking to potential candidates were these young children that were her peers at that time, thinking that, okay, if I ever came across them, I'd show them the photos, see if I could engage them in conversation and hope that we sort of, resurrect those conversations that we had with schoolmates, classmates, playmates, 15, 18, 20 years ago, and hope that maybe something resonates with them.
What was your reaction when you heard recently that there had been some development?
Well, first and foremost, I was so proud of the FBI. They never, ever quit with this. Law enforcement didn't quit. The State Bureau of Investigation, Cleveland County made it a priority. But the FBI took this case and continued to make it a priority within the ranks of the FBI. Like I told you, every supervisor that succeeded me in that position made sure that the Asha Degree case stayed active, that they would pursue all leads. When Valentine's Day came around on that anniversary, there was always an aggressive campaign to go out and through billboards and marketing, increasing the rewards to try and generate some sort of positive information. So I couldn't be more proud of the fact that the men and women in the FBI were so vigilant and cared so deeply about this little girl that they continue with all the work they have to do on a daily basis, made sure that this was a priority. So now we're at a point where there's been some very positive results. And I don't know what's going on, particularly with the case, other than there's been search warrants executed. I've seen some of the press conferences from Cleveland County Sheriff's Department. It's very encouraging. I hope it all turns out to be evidence that brings some resolution to it. It sounds like from their explanation that Asha obviously is no longer with us, but that doesn't mean that we can't bring to justice the people that were responsible for it. So I'm very heartened with that. I just hope it's soon, because I do still feel so badly for the Degrees that they definitely need to have some closure for their little girl.
And given all that's happened here with this case from the start to now, at whatever point this ends up being where we are now with this case, I guess, what sort of message would you send to families who might be in similar situations, waiting for answers? Maybe it's been years, decades, who knows? I mean, anything that you'd like to share with families who are waiting for news?
Obviously I've not been in that situation, so it's hard to hold on, but they held on for 24 years. And I think they need to be encouraged about the fact that there are men and women in law enforcement that say, look, we're not going to forget about a child after 24 years. We're going to continue to be as vigilant as we can. It's such a testament to the vigilance of law enforcement that we're into the third decade of this child being missing, and they never ever gave up. So you need to be encouraged if you can continue to have confidence in law enforcement and understand that they'll continue to pursue this no matter what the cost is. To that, I'm very thankful. And if I was a parent in that situation, it'd be hard for me to tell you what I feel, but what I would say is don't ever give up, because your child is out there. If there's an opportunity for you to have some closure, keep the faith, believe that God will eventually bring some closure in your life. And in this particular case, I do believe that law enforcement has served at least the Degrees well. And it's not going to turn out to the outcome that we all had hoped. But nevertheless, 24 years later, almost a quarter of a century later, we're going to bring some closure to this case. And I think that's extraordinary.
Those are all my questions. Did you have anything else you wanted to add that I didn't ask you?
No, I don't think so. Again, I would just ask people to, understand how dedicated and committed law enforcement is, in today's world. Sometimes that's not always what people think, but I can tell you there are men and women that wear the badge, that put on the uniform, that work for the federal law enforcement agency, state or local. They care every single day. They're coaches, they're teachers, they're parents. And this is a testament that they care deeply, not only about the profession, but as human beings and as members of the community, that they're not going to leave any rock unturned when it comes to trying to find a precious little gift like Asha Degree that's part of their community.
Thank you again for your time. I thought you did great. I wanted to know if you had any, I know this is kind of like a long shot, any photos of you at work from, back in the day? Do you have the photo of Asha still with you? Just any sort of.
You know what? I don't know that I do. I'd have to take a look and see. There might have been some photos, back during the Asha Degree case. I'll have to take a look, to be honest with you. I don't know. I try not to take a look at those too much anymore. Unfortunately, as you age, you try not to look too bad when you were younger, but I'll take a look and let you know. I don't know. I'd have to take a look.
Okay. If you happen to find any of them, you have my number. That's
Yeah.
my cell phone I called you from. So if you don't mind,
Yeah.
maybe just texting them to me if you
No.
find anything.
Sure. I'd be happy to.
That's great. Okay.
All right.
Those are all my questions. I do actually, I'll stop recording here.